I'm quite sure that anybody watching this video of mine now will have seen this video of Tommy Robinson at St Pancras station, about which many people have passed comment, jumped to conclusions. A lot of people have jumped in his defense and said that he would have only defended himself. Some people, of course, have jumped out to say that he's obviously the aggressor here, etc. Now, of course, I can't say too very much about this because, as you probably already know, he was arrested at Luton Airport on suspicion of GBH Section 18, which is grievous bodily harm with intent. That is the more severe kind because it carries life imprisonment. And I understand that he's now been bailed to sometime in September. But the big question that he posed on X just earlier on was about the CCTV. Now, this is something, well, I can't comment on his case specifically. I can comment generally on the use of CCTV and about self-defense in general. Now, if I may ask you, if you do enjoy this channel as an alternative to the mainstream media, please do hit that subscribe button. It's free, it's just a little button below. It really helps the channel grow because I believe that the mainstream media will always try to spin and twist a story, and so many people believe it outright without looking at the details. I aim to look behind those details and try to explain the concepts a little bit more that the mainstream media just won't do, and that will give you a different picture to what's going on. So please do subscribe and I'll really appreciate it, because I've seen a lot of threads which seek and purport to speak with some level of authority about self-defense, what you can and can't do. So just as a very general overview, you understand, without reference to his case, a general overview of self-defense and what you can and can't do. Now, your own circumstances will be important in any consideration for a jury if it gets that far. We always sort of assume that things end up in court and you're before a judge or a jury or both, and all the things that we think about have that in mind. Now, if you are in that situation, all of the circumstances will be taken together. So if you are at a specific point in your life and certain things have happened to you, that is all relevant as to the subjective test as to what you believed at that moment in time. And that is obviously coupled with what happened with the individual. Now, Tommy Robinson has made a lot of comments about what this individual was doing, approaching him and so on. Comments as to whether he was drunk, etc. Now, all of which, if it does end up in court, will be evidence that will be tested in court, etc. And that's if this chap makes a complaint, a formal complaint, as against just the police following it up. But all of that will be relevant as to what a person subjectively believes their circumstances to be in that moment, and whether or not the use of any force is necessary. That is the first part of any self-defense test. What did you really think at the time, and was it necessary to use force? If so, and I'm not done with that bit yet, but if so, then you move on to an objective assessment, an ordinary reasonable person assessment of whether that force was reasonable. Now, that again is on a sliding scale, because if somebody comes up to you and just looks at you in a funny way and then you hit them and they end up on the floor unconscious, etc., that is almost certainly well over the top. But if they came up to you, pushing you, shoving you, or looking like they are going to hit you, or worse still, they have a knife or other weapon, or you suspect or genuinely believe that they have a knife or other weapon, then, again, generally speaking, you can hit them back, and that would usually be self-defense, because if you genuinely believed that you were in danger and force was necessary, and that's what you did, and it was objectively assessed as being reasonable, that's perfectly fine. And as I said, it's a sliding scale. That can go right up to lethal force. Because if you genuinely believe that someone was going to kill you and you did something to them that resulted in their death, then that still might be made out as a full self-defense argument, even though they ended up losing their life because of your actions. But only in those circumstances where it was necessary to use force and the force was proportionate to what you believed was going to happen. Now, the bit about the CCTV is all a little bit frustrating because we have these rules where the police don't like to release this footage and such unless it's trying to determine who somebody was. But if they know who the person was, they don't like to release it. Just like if you've filmed somebody driving badly, they don't like you to release the footage publicly unless that case or until that case has concluded. Now, this is all to prevent any kind of prejudice or any other unintended effect and consequences on any prospective trial, even if it's only in the magistrate's court, strangely enough, because it might end up going to the Crown Court and you just don't know what will happen. But I am of the view, with an open and transparent justice system where everybody should really be entitled to see it. If they've seen one bit, they should be entitled to see the rest. Because I don't really believe that a properly instructed or directed jury would be too swayed by what they see on social media, especially if there are lots of different clips, but they are properly directed to the evidence in a trial and they are told what to look at, they are told what to think of it, and perhaps they are, in one circumstance, again, not talking about Tommy's case here, but in one situation, you might see a video. You may not know watching the video that the person was, let's say, intoxicated through drink or drugs, and they might have been voluntarily intoxicated. Then if they were mistaken at that time, then generally a defendant cannot rely on a mistaken belief as to what was going on if they were voluntarily intoxicated and they made a mistake in the belief that force was necessary. Now, I say all that because you cannot really determine that from a video alone. So when a case gets into court, obviously the evidence will be provided as to whether or not the person was voluntarily intoxicated, etc., and whether or not mistake is relevant. But coming back to self-defense more generally, there's a few comments that I've seen online which I feel I ought to correct, because I think some people have misunderstood self-defense and yet they speak about it with authority as though they understand it in full. Now, some people have said that I've seen that you need to be hit or under some kind of force yourself before you can use some kind of force. And that is not true. You don't need to wait to be hit first before you react and defend yourself. This is called a preemptive strike, and the law allows this so long as you genuinely believe that that force was necessary. So if somebody came right up to you in your personal space, waving their fist, and you genuinely believe they're going to hit you, you don't need to wait to be hit before you defend yourself. You are perfectly entitled to defend yourself before that happens. The law doesn't expect you to wait to be hurt just to defend yourself. The law doesn't expect you to run away. A lot of people have said, why didn't Tommy run away? Now, he's made comments about what he did in his movements in his video, all of which, if necessary, it will be before the court. But I understand he's not been charged as yet. And that might not be the case. It may turn out that nothing happens at all. But he will obviously be entitled to comment on that if the time comes. But generally speaking, you are not obliged to run away and retreat, save that if you then chase the person down, that might change things a little bit. But you're not required to run away and retreat either. But coming back to the CCTV and more generally, there is something I'm a little bit frustrated with, because from the Mohammed Ammars and Mohammed Ahmad trial, there was CCTV obviously released from the airport, which I understand from Manchester Evening News that the IOPC has, I think yesterday, confirmed that an officer is now under investigation for allegedly sharing the footage relating to an active police investigation, and several other potential offences relating to obtaining and disclosure of the video. Now, on the one hand, you might say, well, of course they shouldn't do that. This is something that they shouldn't do, etc. But at the same time, if that footage was to show what happened and people can see it with their own eyes, and ultimately, if it does go to a trial, which in this case it did, and in this case they did find Ammars guilty on 3 out of 4 counts, then to a large extent, the footage showed exactly what happened. And in any event, the jury will be directed as to what to think of that footage by both prosecution counsel, defense counsel, and to a degree, particularly on legal and evidential matters, by the judge. They will be directed as to what to think of that footage, what to make of the footage, whether it was legal, how it was obtained, etc. All of those things will be covered in the trial, and I personally believe that there should not be anything wrong with releasing this footage. And I personally don't think, generally speaking, that anybody should be under any kind of investigation, criminal or otherwise, for releasing footage that showed what happened. Now, all of this is relevant to CCTV and footage because most things are filmed these days, and the best and the quickest way of seeing what happened is to actually see it with your own eyes. Of course, that doesn't show you the full picture. It doesn't show you the state of mind of the people involved, although their actions can give you an idea. It doesn't necessarily show you whether they're intoxicated, although they might stagger around and it might look like they're intoxicated, but not always. So there are a number of different things you can draw from that footage, but I just don't think there's anything wrong with sharing it. But either way, let me know what you think. And just a reminder, all of this is general commentary, not about Tommy's case itself, although I understand he's not been charged at the time of recording. And so let me know what you think. Please do subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate that. And as always, thank you for watching.